All right, I think Jukka will get going. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room as people join and keep those doors open for sure, virtual doors or otherwise. But overall, thanks everyone for being here for September's sustainability series. We're very excited to welcome Jukka from Shift2Electric to provide a presentation for the next 90 minutes on EVs and charging for architects, developers, and engineers and other real estate professionals. As you may imagine, this has a lot of relevance to the DMC project and some of the planning efforts that are underway currently in Rochester. So I'm personally very excited, and I hope you are as well. We do ask that you submit questions in the chat, and we do have time towards the end of the presentation to address those questions. But otherwise, thanks for being here, and I'll get out of the way and I'll turn the reins over to Jukka. So thanks, Jukka, for being here.
All right, thank you, Kevin, and good afternoon. It's already 3 minutes afternoon. So that's great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jukka Kukkonen, and I'm Chief EV Educator and Strategist for Shift2Electric. And I'll talk with you about EVs and charging and all of that good stuff during the next 90 minutes. A couple of words about myself. I'm originally an automotive engineer. I used to work for Ford Motor Company in Europe. I was area manager. Before that, I was a technical trainer for Ford, and I left Ford at the end of the 90s. I was living in Finland at that time, where I'm actually originally from, even though people always ask about my Wisconsin accent. It is not from Wisconsin, it is from Finland. So just to clarify that one, because that's usually the first one we get in the chat. It's like, how do you have so strong Wisconsin accent? Anyways, when I left Ford, I went into consulting and training, and through that work, I actually met my wife, who of course is from Minnesota. So then when we decided to get married, we had to flip a coin if she's going to move to Finland or if I'm going to move to here. And I don't know if I won or lost, but I've been here for the last 20 years. So that's how I ended up here. And I followed the market still, what's happening in automotive industry side of things, and I started to see over 10 years ago that EV technology is maturing in a way that it will become a viable option for us. And I decided it's time for me to get back to this, and I started my own company working with electric cars after that. Nowadays, my main job is to stay on top of what's happening in the market, so I can help my customers to figure out what's their role in this marketplace. I do a lot of education and webinars and workshops, and then I help utility companies figure out what's their role in this. I work with manufacturers to help them approach the market the right way, and so forth. I work with the apartment building and condominium side of things, the charging for those setups since 2013, when we did the first DOE funded project on that side, looking for a best solution for that. And if you go to mudcharging.com, you can find more information about all of that there. I've also worked in a workplace charging area, so we built programs and best practices for that starting in 2014, and you can find information about that in workplacecharging.com website, so you can take a look at those. And I started the Minnesota EV Owners Group in 2012, and that has grown to become one of the biggest and most active regional EV owners groups in the US. So we do a lot of education and outreach and all of that good stuff, just sharing our experiences. What is it like to own, drive, and charge EVs here in Minnesota? And I teach EV market and technologies at the University of St. Thomas. We just started our class last night for this fall, and I have 14 students interested in learning about all of this. I have 45 hours with my students, and we still are scratching the surface on all of this. With you guys, I have 90 minutes, so this will be a pretty abbreviated version of EV market and charging infrastructure discussions. And then I'm EV market expert working for Fresh Energy, and this workshop today is brought to you by Fresh Energy. So those of you who don't know Fresh Energy too well, it's a local nonprofit in St. Paul that is focused on speeding Minnesota's transition to clean energy economy. And of course, automotive sector is one of the areas where we have really good opportunities to clean the things a lot with electric cars. So that's why Fresh Energy is supporting these kind of efforts. All right, let's start by talking about the energy a little bit first. If you look at here's a share of total US energy consumption on different areas. Industrial sector is the biggest, 32% of the energy consumed in the US goes to industrial sector, 29% goes to transportation, then residential, commercial. So based on this, transportation would be the second biggest energy consumer in the US. But if you look at inside the industrial sector and what kind of areas are using that energy there, you can see that petroleum refining is actually 31% of energy consumption in the industrial sector. So now if you take, and then we know pretty easily where the petroleum goes after it's refined. So if you now take almost 1/4 of the industrial sector and add that to transportation, you can see that transportation actually is by far the biggest energy consumer in the US. So it's very important that we look into that and figure out how we can lower our energy consumption in that area. And EVs, of course, provide us really good opportunity to do that. So we have used internal combustion engines for the last 100 years. Being an automotive engineer, I always have to start everything with from technology side of things. So internal combustion engine is a pretty complicated machine in many ways. We are trying to capture the energy that is in chemical form in gasoline and turn it into mechanical energy to provide us propulsion. Well, challenge is that we are doing that with internal combustion engine by using small explosions inside the cylinder there, and it's not a very efficient way to do it, understandably. So there's a ton of losses. There's losses through the coolant systems and losses through the hot exhaust system and so forth. So internal combustion engines are only 15 to 25% efficient. Someone has actually said that internal combustion engines are really good heaters, and as a side product, we get some propulsion power out of them too, which is very good description of internal combustion engine, how it operates. So if someone would invent this machine right now and come to you and say, hey, I have this great invention, internal combustion engine, and you would ask, well, how efficient is it? Oh, it's about 15 to 25% efficient. Well, no one would buy that idea anymore. But since we've used it 100 years, no one is questioning this too much. Good news is that electric motors are quite a bit more simple and much more energy efficient too. Electric motors have been around 100 years too, not a new technology. In present day, electric motor, for example, here is an induction motor where you have just one moving part, the rotor. In this kind of setup, it's very easy to see that you can have much higher efficiencies in this one, and electric motors that are used in EVs are between 85 to 95% efficient. So it's totally different efficiency level. So now you might ask, well, okay, if electric motor technology is so much better than internal combustion engine, why haven't we already moved to electric motors, using electric motors in cars decades ago? Well, the challenge is the battery side of things. Battery side was not ready for it decades ago. Electric motors have been, yes, no problem with that, but batteries haven't. And that is changing now rapidly. If you think about when we got our first mobile phones, then you got this mobile phone set, and then you had to haul a full case full of batteries with you in 80s when they came out. Nowadays we have these small machines that are much more efficient in every way. So that tells a good story about how the battery technology has improved. Then if you look at what has happened in the vehicle side of things, the battery tech has advanced rapidly. If you look at the graph there on left side, you can see the battery pack prices for lithium-ion batteries have dropped from over $1,000 to closer to $100. Actually, this is an older graph. I'm sorry, the new graph actually shows 2020. It's closer to $100. This one shows up to 2018. So there's a newer graph from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. But we are starting to reach $100 right now. There are actually some reports that that in some cases we are under $100 already for battery pack price. And just to give you a comparison here, if you, for example, would have taken the Ford Mustang Mach-E battery that is 80 kilowatt hour battery pack, if Ford would have built that vehicle in 2010, that would have cost them about $90,000, but at least over $80,000 to just build that battery pack. Now, this year it might only cost them $9,000 to build it, or $8,000. So it's much cheaper to get the big batteries to these cars now, and it allows the manufacturers to actually make margin with these cars. So they start to make money with EVs, and that of course helps them to bring this in the masses. So that's a very big development there, and it still continues. So that's good. At the same time, we are seeing shift to renewable electricity. So here's an example of Xcel Energy's carbon emissions on the right there. You can see how fast the carbon emissions have been dropping because Xcel has been closing their coal plants, and it still continues the same graph and moving into renewable energy, wind and solar and other things. And other utilities are doing the same. So this is not specific just to Xcel. This applies to other utilities too. But that means that our grid is getting cleaner, which is great for all of us in general when we use electricity. At the same time, if you start driving electric, then your car will get cleaner every day because the grid is getting cleaner. You don't have to do anything about it. So that's another good news there. Talking about emissions here, here's a comparison between internal combustion engine and electric cars, the well-to-wheel car emissions. So if you drive 12,000 miles a year with a traditional car, you produce about 11,000 pounds of CO2. If you drive the same distance in a year with EV and you charge it from the grid, you're producing about 4,000 pounds of CO2. So much less. Again, comes from efficiency of EVs. You're using less energy, you're producing less CO2 and other emissions. Of course, these numbers are from 2014, and I just showed you how fast our grid is getting cleaner. So that number is not 4,000 anymore. What is it? I don't know exactly, but it might be like 3,500 or something like that. But just reminding everybody, that's getting lower all the time. And then, of course, EVs provide us ultimate freedom when it comes to our driving. We can choose how the energy for our driving is produced. We don't have this freedom with internal combustion engine cars. We are stuck with oil. But with EVs, we get to choose. Are we just buying directly from the grid? Are we asking from our utility company we want some renewable energy there? Or are we, for example, putting solar panels on our own roof? We get to choose. That's another cool thing about EVs. You have more choices there, more personal freedom when it comes to your driving. All right, so what has happened in the EV market in recent years? If you look at the EV sales in US versus Europe, we used to be very similar to Europe for many years here. But then in 2019, Europe started accelerating, and 2020 totally took off the market in Europe. The reason for this is that in Europe, they set up a stricter emission standards for cars in general. And they measure the emissions there by CO2 emission, equivalent emissions per kilometer. And average fleet in Europe, the new cars was about 130 grams of CO2 per kilometer. and they set up the new emission standards to 95 grams per kilometer. So all the manufacturers had to have their fleet average of new car sales meet 95 grams per kilometer CO2 emissions. That meant that traditional engine technology could not help them to meet that. So they actually had to provide EVs in bigger numbers to the market for them to meet those stricter emission standards. And European auto manufacturers, the same stories that we hear here in the US too, is saying, well, I don't know if there's this demand from consumers for these EVs, and I don't know if there's enough charging infrastructure and all of that to match this and so forth. But when they brought the cars in the market, they realized there is demand. There's no shortage of demand. There was plenty of demand. That's why their sales just took off. So they tripled their sales in a year in Europe. And we actually are in the same situation here. In the US, we have plenty of demand. We just don't have the cars available yet. When the cars come to the market, we will see similar kind of growth. There's no question about it. So some market trends by numbers. US light-duty sales were down last year almost over 14%. That was due to pandemic, naturally. But US Tesla sales were up 20%. Just to give you an idea about the trend lines. Tesla's market share in the US was 66%. So they are totally ruling the market on EV side of things. And that's because other manufacturers are not providing enough units into the market. They are not bringing their cars here because they actually have to work so hard to make sure that they get enough units to Europe and ramp up their production to meet that need. And since US doesn't have robust emission standards in place, there's no requirements the same way as there are in Europe. So manufacturers are treating the US market right now as a sideshow. They are selling here the same stuff that they have been selling for the last 20 years because no one is asking them more in that way. And that'll hopefully change, that we'll start to see them actually bringing EVs here because they are realizing that this is a market opportunity. If they don't do anything about this, then Tesla will eat their lunch. And of course, here right now still, if US is a sideshow, then Midwest is by design a sideshow of a sideshow. So that's our challenge. We just can't get enough cars. EV market share in 2019, 3.3%. EV market share in Europe, 2020, 10.2%. So tripled that market share. And here's the difference. EV models available in the US 2020, 50, which in theory was true. In real life, half of that were decently available even in the US. Whereas in Europe, they have 170 EV models already available and more coming all the time. EV market share in Germany, that is very traditional car market, was in January 22%. August, it was already 27.6%. So almost 30%, getting close to that. EV market share in Norway last year was 75%. Last couple of months, it has been over 85%. European auto industry expected that EV market share in Europe for 2025 is 40%. This is their latest realization that they learned after last year, is that this thing is growing really fast. Earlier, they were like, no, I don't know if this is going to happen. And when they started to bring the cars in there, they have learned that, yes, this is happening and fast. And if Germany, that is the biggest automotive market in Europe, is already 27%, that 40% might happen earlier than 2025 even. So this is really going forward fast there. EV adoption in Finland, where I'm from, this is a good example for us. I would like to, of course, think that Finland is always one of the leaders in the world in all of these things, and that's unfortunately not always the case. So they oftentimes just check what Sweden does and then follow whatever Sweden happens to do. There's a little bit of that there. But if you look at this in 2017, EV sales in Finland was about 2%. So that's the light green and the green areas there. So they were same level as we were last year here in the US. Now, but if you look at what has happened in recent years, and right now they are over 30% of the sales in Finland are electric. So we're just talking about 4 years here. That's how fast the change can start to happen when we get the cars into the market. Yeah, at the same time, you can look at how diesel, that is the blue one, has really shrunk, and the same with gasoline, that is the orange, shrunk very fast. So that's the change that can happen. In Sweden, they are right now over 50% of the market is EVs, and then in Norway, I said over 85%. Industry has realized that this is happening, and they are saying, yep, we are moving to that direction. So GM has pledged to eliminate tailpipe emissions from new light-duty vehicles by 2035. Mercedes said just recently, which I think is last week, that they are expecting that plug-in hybrid and fully electric cars are accounting half of global car sales by 2025. And that's 5 years sooner than the company's forecast just months ago. So this is so rapidly changing that they are changing their forecasts very often nowadays. Ford Europe said that 100% of their passenger vehicles will be zero emissions capable in 2026, and by 2030 all electric. Norway is planning to phase out their sales of new fossil fuel vehicles by 2025, and Jaguar is switching to all electric 2025. And Volvo CEO Håkan Samuelsson said in January that I would be surprised if we wouldn't deliver only electric cars from 2030 onwards. And then in March they announced, yes, that's exactly what we will be doing. And Deborah Wall, Chief Marketing Officer for GM, has said that there are moments in history where everything changes, inflection points. We believe such a point is upon us for mass adoption of electric vehicles. So this is becoming pretty clear right now. So what's happening in Minnesota right now? What's our situation? We have this great resource for us to kind of take a look at where the market is, what has happened. This is put together by Minnesota Department of Transportation, and it's called Electric Vehicle Dashboard. So you can just Google that, and you'll find the dashboard there. And first you can see the map there, and then there's some charging points there. We have about 1,000 level 2 chargers and 200 DC fast chargers, so total almost 1,200 public charging stations. This is a question we often get, is that do we have enough public charging infrastructure available? And I should usually say yes, we have pretty good coverage of DC fast charging and other public charging, and there's more coming all the time. But we have to remember that most of the charging happens at home. But I'll come back to that soon in this presentation. Then if you look at the vehicle side, we have over 12,000 battery electric vehicles and almost 8,000 plug-in hybrids, so altogether 20,000 EVs driving on Minnesota roads right now. So let's talk about range. My story about this one is that it has changed quite a bit. So I have here an x-axis that shows range from 0 to 400 miles, and then I have this line here on 27 miles. That's an average how many miles do people drive in a day in the US. When we started driving EVs in our family, we got the Nissan Leaf, that was 2012, and that one had only 73 miles of range. That was top of the line car in 2012, but that's already 9 years ago. So things have changed. But that car worked really well for my wife. At that time, we live in Highland Park, St. Paul, and my wife was working in St. Louis Park, so she drove about 35 miles a day. That worked great for her commuting. And even in the coldest winter days, when that car maybe dropped 50% of the range because it has so small battery, so heating load and inefficiencies and so forth, in the wintertime eat up that range quite a bit, especially from those that are smaller, have smaller battery. Now the new cars with bigger batteries, the impact is not as big. But at that time, with short range, yes, it was a bit challenging, but still it worked well for my wife. Then 2018, Nissan came out with the 2018 Leaf that has 150 miles of range. So over doubling the range of the 2012 Leaf, and the price was $3,000 less. And then 2019, they came out with the Leaf Plus that has 225 miles of range. So this just shows very well how the range has changed. So 2019 model has 3 times as many miles as 2012 model had. And this is good information when you talk with people. Most of the people are still thinking about electric vehicles having a very short range, but it's not the case anymore because of the battery developments. We have plenty of cars that have longer range than 200 to 260 miles of range. More even that have, more cars that have range up to 300 or over 300 miles, and then some that are even make it to 400 level. And that over 400 level is 10 times more than average driver drives in a day. So the range is totally different than what it used to be 9 years ago, even 6-7 years ago. So that's important for us to remember. Last year, average range for car EVs sold in the US was over 250 miles. So we are not talking about 100-mile range cars. We're talking about 250 plus mile range cars nowadays. And then, of course, people can choose a plug-in hybrid where you don't have any range limitations, but every day your first miles are electric. So with those, you still have internal combustion engine that turns on when your battery state of charge gets lower. But every morning when you have charged your car overnight, your first miles are electric. So if you drive like 20 miles in a day for your commuting, you might be electric the whole time. So you don't even start the internal combustion engine, and then you come home, you plug it in. Next morning, again, you start with electric. But it provides you the flexibility. This works really well for people who are still a bit concerned about the range. Then it's easy stepping stone for them moving forward. We have an EV info list that you can download from evinfolist.com, and Kevin can probably put this in a chat, the link to there, so that you can just go and download that one. That's tool for you to look at all the different vehicles that are available here for us. For Midwest, we have 3 pages full of cars, so check that out. And we use this quite a bit in different events, just providing good information for people about the vehicles that are available right now. All right, so how do we charge our cars then? Where does that happen? And as I already mentioned, home is where most of the charging happens. My wife, for example, has driven 9 years with electric cars and she has never used a public charging station. Home is just the most affordable and most convenient way to power your driving. You come home, you plug the car in, the next morning you unplug it and go. Both of those operations take about 5 seconds. I measured it once when I came home. Like, if I get out of my car, how long will it take for me to plug in? 5 seconds. And then unplugging another 5 seconds. So it's very easy. That's why people do it at home. And of course, then utility companies provide EV rates and so forth. So it makes it even cheaper. If workplace charging is available, that's great. People use that a lot. And then public charging is important for us in many ways, especially for long distance driving. But as a portion of the charging, it's much smaller slice than what we originally think. I, for example, use public charging when I go for drive long distances. That's the only times I use public charging. How to charge an EV? What are the ways to do that? And simply, every car comes with level 1 cord set that works for all the cars. The car end of it is standardized J1772 plug that works for all cars. Tesla has a little different connector, but they have a small adapter that they can use to use that same connector. So everybody could use that one. And then the other end is just 120 outlet plug. So if you have 120 outlet in your garage, great, you can start driving electric. No issues with that. We are just limited by how much power we can pull out of that 120 outlet. So this cord set works well if you drive 30 miles or less in a day. Then it can charge your car back up, the battery, every night. But if you drive more than 30 miles a day, then I would recommend installing a level 2 charging station. But truth is that I know many people who actually have used just this level 1 cord set for years for their charging, but that's based on their own usage patterns. So if person decides to put the level 2 charging station in, then that requires 240 volt connection. The one on the right there is for public chargings, and then the one on the left there, the white one, is a home charging station. They still use the same J1772 plug for car end, so that's simple. And that home unit, for example, you just use a couple of screws to screw it to the wall. Electrician comes and installs 3-wire 240 volt connection there. Very simple installation. Any electrician can do that. If they don't know how to do that, they should not be electricians. So that's very clear. That one, the basic units cost $500 to $600, so they are not that expensive. Of course, public charging units like the one on the right there, if they have all the different bells and whistles there for access control and for payments and tracking and all of that stuff, then it's going to be much more money. So depending on what the use case is, you want to look into that. And basic idea with level 2 charging is that it's meant that this system will be able to charge your car overnight, no matter how far you drive. So that's what it does. And then the fastest way to charge your car is use the DC fast charging stations that are then located in convenient locations by the highways, usually at malls or different places where there's amenities, or then they can be in city centers. So that's the fastest way to charge cars. Right now we are seeing that some of the fastest one of those are moving into like 350 kilowatt level. We are used to right now most of the basic installation being 50 kilowatt level, but it's really getting faster quite quickly here, and higher power levels. In that DC fast charging, we have 3 standards. Tesla has their own standard, so they use their own supercharging network for it. There has been talk that might be open to others too. Maybe that happens in the future. They're starting in Europe, but in the US, they would need to provide an adapter for others to use that. Then there's 2 standards for others. There's CHAdeMO, that is Japanese standard, and then there's CCS combo. And this CHAdeMO standard is actually going away. It's not used by many entities anymore. It's only used in Mitsubishi Outlander and Nissan Leaf right now, and Nissan has already announced that the next year they'll move into the CCS combo in the Aria model. So CCS combo is the connector that will be used in the future for all cars except Tesla in the US. So just so you're aware of that. Here's a picture of what the charging station map looks like. As I said, more and more of these public charging stations coming up all the time. The orange ones are the DC fast charging ones, and the green ones are the level 2s. And you can find this kind of mapping from plugshare.com, which is one of the most commonly used mapping apps for EV owners. So then if you look at the cost a little bit, do a quick calculation of your own charging costs. If you drive about 1,000 miles a month, EVs, their efficiency is roughly 3 miles per kilowatt hour. I use this as an average number for all these calculations. Some people say that I should use a little higher number, but I'm much rather have a bit conservative numbers. But if you memorize that 3 miles per kilowatt hour, you can do all the calculations you ever want about EVs and their what the costs are for driving them. Monthly kilowatt hour usage then is 1,000 miles divided by 3 miles per kilowatt hour. That means that you just use 333 kilowatt hours for your driving that month. If you pay for a regular flat rate, which usually is about 12 cents per kilowatt hour, your monthly costs are about $40 a month. If you take advantage of EV rate, utility companies usually provide some kind of time of day pricing when your electricity is half off during the nighttime. Maybe your kilowatt hour cost then is about 7 cents, and then your monthly cost is about $23. So now if you compare that to how much you're paying for your cell phone every month, then really our driving doesn't cost us anything with EVs, which is the case. I have here a comparison of internal combustion engine versus EV household. If you look at the whole household, in average, US driver drives about 13,500 miles a year, and there's 1.8 drivers on average in a household. So average household drives about 24,300 miles per year. If you're driving internal combustion engine car, you get usually about 25 miles per gallon as average for new cars. That means that for driving 24,300 miles, you use 970 gallons of gasoline. Every gallon of gasoline actually has 33.7 kilowatt hours of energy. So you just use 33,000 kilowatt hours of energy for that driving. If the gas costs $2.50 per gallon, which I think it doesn't anymore, but when I put this slide together, it still was $2.50. We'll see what it will be in the future. We're talking about 2,400, but right now, of course, that number would be about $3,000. EV household, again, if your EV consumes about 3 miles per kilowatt, gets about 3 miles per kilowatt hour. You drive that 24,300 miles, you used 8,100 kilowatt hours. If you take advantage of that EV rate and your electricity costs you 7 cents per kilowatt hour overnight, then your annual cost is about $570. So annual energy cost difference is $18,550 or $18.55. But as we know, since the gas is more expensive right now, that annual cost difference is over $2,000. So it's quite a big difference, when you think about it. And that savings is very good for you and for our local economy, because you can use it for something else than paying for your oil consumption, which is unnecessary, of course. Maintenance advantage. So if you look at the maintenance of electric cars, here's a maintenance for Chevy Bolt, 2017 Chevy Bolt. They say that you should rotate the tires once a year. You should replace the passenger air compartment filter every 2 years. That job takes about 10 minutes to do, if even that, and anyone can do that themselves. You should replace the brake fluid every 5 years, and you should drain and fill vehicle coolant circuits every 150,000 miles. And that's that. So it's not very many items there. Then you compare how often you have to go to the dealership to take care of your Chevrolet Cruze Limited, that is comparable car. You can see the big difference there. It's totally different thing to keep and maintain internal combustion engine car than it is for EV. There are some incentives available. So federal tax credit for EVs is available up to $7,500 depending on the vehicle. GM and Tesla have already lost these federal tax credits because they have sold over 200,000 cars so far, and the size for others is dependent on how big the battery is. And if you look at this EV info list that I recommended you to download, you can find there's a base price, then after that there's a federal tax credit, and then you can see the final price. So it provides you all the information about this too. Of course, there's now a discussion in federal level if they would change that tax credit. We'll see what kind of changes would come to it. Then there's also a federal tax credit for EV charging station installations. So you can get 30% of installation costs back in your tax as a tax credit, and that's up to $1,000 for homeowners and up to $30,000 for commercial properties. So that's good to keep in mind. And then Minnesota Department of Transportation provides MinPass electric vehicle incentive pilot. And of course, this doesn't apply too well to Rochester. It's only for Twin Cities where they are trying to control the traffic with this a little bit. But they do this so you get one-time credit if you have a battery electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid, either you bought or you leased new or used EV. You can get that for it. And then I always recommend check out what your local utility company provides. They have different kind of programs, they have different kind of incentives, and they can definitely help you with all of these things. So you can just go to mncharging.org, and that provides you links to all of your local utility companies. So you can just go there and choose from the list your local utility company and get directly to their EV pages if they have such. All right, let's talk about EV charging at the multi-unit dwellings and commercial properties. EV readiness levels, that's one way to look into is if your parking areas are EV capable, EVSE ready, or if the EVSE is installed. So on the right there are my recommendation, EV capable, where you install electric panel capacity and then put a raceway there for that area where you would be installing the charging stations. So my recommendation there is do at least 40 amps, 240 volt there on an electric panel capacity, and use 1-inch conduit so that you have plenty of space there if you need to upgrade it in the future. EVSE ready outlet is practically the same thing, but now instead of just terminating in a junction box, now you're installing there an outlet. And if you end up doing this, I would recommend installing NEMA 1450 outlet that is most commonly used with some of these charging stations. I don't necessarily recommend this one for public spaces because unfortunately our plug standards are not very safe here in the US. It's so easy to just pull those 240 volt plugs out and just put your fingers in there. That I just don't recommend using plug-in type setups in public spaces. I much rather recommend doing hardwire installations when all the connections are in boxed in junction boxes. So please do that instead. So I would say ignore the EVSE ready outlet approach. Talk about EV capable or EV installed setups, because the only difference there for that second one is you have pulled the wires and install the outlet. But if junction box is anyways better choice, might not add too much value there. And then of course EVSE install is pretty self-explanatory there as a readiness level. There's quite a bit of code developments right now happening. An international energy conservation code already in 2019 had information about what their recommendation is for 1 or 2 family dwellings and townhouses, so that there should be at least some EV ready spaces. And for multi-family dwellings, you should put roughly, 20% of total parking spaces should be EV ready. That's what they are recommending, and I think that makes already quite a bit of sense. I would like to see higher numbers, because the market, when it starts moving, it will happen quickly, and at that time we need the charging infrastructure at home. The reasoning is because most of the charging happens at home the same way as I showed. Their numbers show the same way. Is that you have to make sure that people can charge at home, because it makes it, again, it's the easiest and most affordable way to power your driving. The other thing there to keep in mind is, of course, it's way cheaper to do the installation when it's new construction versus going and doing the remodeling and later installing those. It's so much more expensive to do the retrofit installations, because in basic new construction, you can add it there very easily. It's not that expensive, so it definitely should be done at that point. Some of the examples of codes, you can look at different places. California Green Building Code went voluntarily to 20% there. Atlanta 20%, New York City 20%, Vancouver 20%, and so forth. You can see the pretty clear trend line here. 20% seemed to be the right number, and this was the right number. This is 2 years ago already. Right now, I would actually recommend going higher. because we are seeing the developments in Europe, how fast the market is changing, and everybody needs to do this. So whatever you can do, do it. But I would keep 20% as a bare minimum of what should be done. Then if we think about the motivating factors for multi-unit dwellings installing these, satisfying their current residents and tenant demand, this also applies somewhat to the workplace commercial properties. Attracting new residents and tenants, very clearly there too. Complying with local building requirements, leveraging different incentives and grant funding, adding EV charging as a revenue stream. I would not put too much effort into this one. EV charging is definitely necessarily not a revenue stream right now at these levels. It's more of a service. It will be a revenue stream in the future, but right now what we are doing, the first programs are going to be more of a service to get things moving forward. It definitely can have an impact on property value because it's added amenity. At the same time, if you don't have EV charging, it'll definitely put decreasing factor into your property value. I would not buy anything that doesn't have EV capability or easy way to add it because it's I mean, it wouldn't work for me at all. So you're already losing a portion of the market, and that market portion is growing all the time. So it makes sense to go there. And of course, environmental stewardship is another good reason to go there. Considerations for, especially for multi-housing buildings: power capacity, what kind of breaker panel capacity is there, what kind of conduit runs are needed, what kind of charging stations are used, how to do the metering, how to do the billing and payments, what kind of pricing structure you're using, maintenance, and how to do the future proofing of the installation. Some of these have already been solved, but these are the things that people have to anyhow go through, and there are some easy solutions for many of these. And common challenges right now is the stakeholders need a lot of education. There are many different stakeholders in this one, and they need a lot of education to make well-educated decisions about it. Because if they don't know enough about it, they can't make good decisions about it. There also isn't much extra power capacity available, especially in older buildings, so that can be expensive to add. That's where utility companies can help. Conduit runs are not equal. So if we think about, for example, condo building, electric room might be at the other end of the parking garage, and then some people have their parking spots right by it, and some people have it at the other end of the parking garage. So for them, the conduit runs are much longer. So you have to figure out how we're doing this so that it's fair for everyone. And that can be done, but just keeping that in mind. Metering and billing can be labors. Again, that's where utility company comes in play. Xcel Energy, for example, has very good programs to help with this, and I'm sure other utilities are doing similar things too. How to include the investment cost to pricing? I would say if you're planning to do that, put it as a long-term investment. So don't try to recoup it in the first 3 or 5 years. It doesn't make any sense because you're providing this as a service or new amenity. Then how do we provide future EV owners the same deal as early adopters, so that we, for example, make sure that power capacity is there so others can get it too? And how to get the time of use rate? Again, utility company can help with that. Safety aspects in design and install. Consider whether EVSE locations. So EVSE is the charging station. Where's the location? What's the best place for it, depending on what kind of cars are used? How to do the cord management there. We already talked about the hardware versus outlet approach. And outlet approach actually by code requires GFCI, separate GFCI in the breaker panel. So outlet approach is actually more expensive too, because hardwired doesn't require the GFCI. Then make sure that there's a good lighting and signage in those installations. We have quite a bit of tools, for example, at the mudcharging.com. We have power and energy calculator there that you could use to do individual calculations for different users and how they are charging, what's the cost of it, and so forth. If you look at this as an example, now you can see that it comes down to about $1 a day. They're roughly in this average calculation. But again, you can download that tool and do all kinds of calculations with it. We also have metering and payment systems table at the MUD charging, so you can look at the different options that you have. If the metering is connected to homeowner's existing meter, makes it much easier because utility company does that. Utility sub-metering, meter is separate or inside the EVSE. Again, utility company can take care of that. It can be sub-metered by building management, or then it can be flat billing with estimate, or then you could use third-party systems and billing. So there are different options there, and they have their pros and cons. So look into that and figure out what might work best for you. You can download that at mudcharging.com. Then one of the approaches I've put together is this future-ready multi-unit dwelling charging concept that I kind of put together in 2019 when I was thinking, okay, if someone asked me what would be my recommendation for EV charging in multi-unit dwellings, this is what I would recommend. Of course, it would be great if you could just run the conduit for each parking spot and have power capacity and breakers for each of those. That would be the ideal, but it costs a lot when you add that much power capacity and that much conduit runs. So I don't think many places are going to do it. So this is kind of a compromise of, but still how to get it done so that it's future proof. So the idea is to run a conduit to every 4th parking spot in your garage there and just terminate it into a junction box. Then make sure that you have breaker panel capacity for all of those spots, 50 amp line to these spots. That means that first 25% of the installations is pretty simple because you have capacity for them very easily. Then if you have more drivers than 25%, you go to 25 to 50% level, then the power can be shared between 2 stations. Then if the power we go higher, then you can share the power with 3 stations, and you can of course share the power with 4 stations if you reach close to 100%. But at that time, I would recommend increasing the power capacity at least to 80 amps in that, and that's why we put the big enough conduit there in the beginning, so you can do that. This will require charging stations with embedded metering and power sharing capability, but those already exist. So it's not technology that you would have to wait for it. You can already get it. And as I said, you can find this concept and other information at mudcharging.com. Utility companies can definitely help here. They can provide advisory and education services. They can provide EV rates. They can provide the metering and billing. They can even provide charging infrastructure. Like Excel right now is, you can rent the charging station from them for $10 a month. So it makes it pretty simple and easy. And then they can provide make-ready options, both for commercial and residential customers in this. Just a quick example of capacity. If you have 200 amps, 3-phase breaker panel, that can provide 72 kilowatts theoretically. And by code, it can be only loaded to 80%. So that means effectively 57 kilowatts. And usually the load limitation is done by limiting each breaker load to 80%. So for level 2 stations, you could have 50 amp level, 8 lines. If you do 40 amp level, 10 lines. If you do 30 amp level, you could put 14 lines there. If you would do level 1 stations, you could put 50 lines there. So that's much bigger number. But I wouldn't recommend this anywhere else than in workplace charging, because at home you want to have the flexibility to be able to charge the car the full overnight, no matter how much you've driven. But with workplace charging, you're only trying to provide enough electricity to cover the electricity that we use by driver when coming to work. So that's why level 1 stations might work just fine there in workplaces. And then we are in a Q&A portion of the thing. So I would like to open this to questions for your questions, and I can do myself to provide answers here and see how that goes.
Great, thanks, Jukka. We did get a number of questions as you were working through the slides. The first one that
usually is the case. There's usually not the shortage of questions, which is good. That's what we want.
Yeah, definitely. The first one is, what about retrofitting existing condominium garages? Cost considerations, practicality, and owner reservations. And these are older condos, so pre-2000.
Yeah, yep. These are, as we know, all case by case things. You have to look at what you can do there. But this all applies to those condos. Usually my recommendation for is, first of all, talk with your utility company. See what your utility company says, how they can help. They might be able to help in that process. Excel, for example, is right now starting their technical assistance program with that, and they will offer some even make-readies for existing buildings too. They might be able to help with the power capacity side of things and so forth. So that's the first thing that I would do, is talk with your utility company about it, see what they can do, and then figure out how are the costs shared between the different members of the homeowner association. So if homeowner association, for example, could pay for the capacity side of things, and maybe the main conduit runs or things ready there, and then the owners of the cars and the spots would pay for the last part of the conduit run there, and of course the installation of their own station. Then it starts to be fair for everyone, so the homeowner association provides the capability for doing it, but each owner will still pay their share of it when it comes to their time to do it. And it also enables everybody to do the same when they decide to start driving electric.
Great, thank you. Drew, I might call on you to clarify the reference on the 40 amp to 50 amp question that you typed in the chat.
Yeah. So Jukka, hey Jukka,
hey,
how's it going?
Hey Drew.
You had recommended a 40 and not a 50 amp for in the house for setting aside space. With the newer vehicles coming out, I guess is it 40 or 50, or is it you would recommend 40, sizing 40 only?
Well, whatever you can do there, do it. I don't know if doing 40 or 50, it doesn't make huge heck of a difference. The challenge we have with the multi-unit dwellings, as you know, is that power capacity becomes an issue in a hurry. So that's why I recommended 40 rather than 50, because it at least provides us a bit more capacity there. At the same time, definitely not the wrong thing to put for 50 there. The newer cars, some of them have higher capacity, so they might, to get take advantage of their full charging capability, you might need a 50 amp. So you're right about that. There is a little bit of that there. At the same time, for most of our driving, they don't need to be charged that fast at home. For example, one of our cars can use 48 amps for charging, so that would require 60 amp circuit for it. I never charged with 48 amps. I've always dialed it down to 25 amps because that's plenty for us in our charging. And that way we don't put that big of a spike into the grid. So there's a ton of education that is involved with this. Is talking with people, is what is actually your need versus just what this car can do, and then what is good for the whole community. If you talk about for example, condo building and homeowner association, if we would put 50 or 60 amps to everyone, it would just be so much more expensive to do that for everyone. So those are the discussions that need to be had when these programs are designed, and as I said, a lot of education needed. So I'm sure, Drew, you are doing all this already with different entities there.
Great, thank you. One other question that Drew had too was any recommendations that you have for vehicle to grid connection, like the Ford Lightning that's been announced?
Yeah, I don't think that I have any recommendations yet. It'll be very cool when we get that opportunity to do that vehicle to house, vehicle to grid. I think mostly, for example, for Lightning, so what this is referring to is Ford F-150 Lightning is Ford's new electric pickup truck, and that has capability to provide power back from the battery pack. But I see it mostly used so that if you're, for example, a contractor and you work in different work sites, you just open up your big trunk there, take your tools out, plug your tools into your car and start working. You don't have to be figuring out where to plug or anything like that because your car already provides you that capability. I think that's mostly how that's used. At the same time, it will provide an opportunity to also provide the power back to the house. Right now, I would think that you would mostly want to use it just as a backup power if there's an outage. But for you to be able to do that, we have to remember that you have to put automatic or some kind of transfer switch between your house and the grid so that you prevent the backfeeding from your house in these kind of situations. So what happens is if you have a power outage, you need to make sure that there's no power going back from your house to the power lines, because the workers are working on power lines and they don't want to be getting the electricity back that way. It would be very dangerous. So those considerations need to be taken into account when these settings are done. But it definitely is a cool new addition in that way, because that kind of Ford F-150 with the size of the battery that it will have could easily power my household for over a week without any problems. So if there's a grid outage, I could be fine for a week with just that battery. And so it kind of gives us a good idea that, hey, this is going to replace many generators and provide the battery backup for our houses and other critical loads in the future.
Awesome, thank you. Another question received was, can you elaborate on the length of conduit run and fairness? Is it energy loss due to longer cabling?
Oh, okay. So this was mostly just about the costs. Of course, you have to take into account those electrical calculations there too, but it was just about the cost. So because in home condominiums, usually homeowners have deeded parking, meaning that their parking is set that you have this parking spot here and your neighbor has that and another neighbor has that, and you can't really swap those spots too easily. So if you happen to be the lucky one and your parking spot is right close to the electrical room, the conduit run to your spot is very short, so the installation cost would be very short, very cheap for you. If homeowner association only would pay the breaker panel capacity and say the homeowners, okay, well, you have to pay for the conduit from here to your parking spot. Then if you happen to be right by it, yours is cheap, and then your neighbor whose parking spot is at the other end of the garage, it would cost him 10 times more in the installation cost because the conduit run would be so much longer. So that's why I'm recommending that homeowner association takes this into account and provide some kind of a basic conduit runs to central locations there, where then people pay just the last leg for it. One of the ways is to do it is to just run it to every fourth parking spot, as I showed in that example, and that way everybody is from 3 cars max, or max 2 cars from the closest junction box. So it would be fair for everyone. Everybody could expect to pay roughly the same price for their installation.
Great, thanks, Jukka. We did run through all the questions that I saw in the chat. Maybe if folks want to raise their hand and see if there are any other questions from the group before we let you go.
Well, I have other things. We can definitely do some small group exercises here if we want to.
Oh, okay.
We have that option too. We don't have to. If we have 90 minutes, let's not let people out too easily. We can throw them to work here to actually think about their examples. If we have any questions right now, please do so. If you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand or anything like that. No questions. So Kevin, if you want to, you could put people into small groups. I would say 4 people in a group or something like that. Have you used the small groups in Zoom? It's the breakout rooms option.
Yep, I can do that. I have them set up and ready to go.
Excellent. Well, let me explain this one. So let's give you guys, how about 8 minutes? 8 minutes is good. Let's give you eight minutes to in a small group. So you'll be finding yourself, go into these breakout rooms and talk about some existing or future project that you would like to include EV charging into it. Whatever it is in your group. It could be just one person has this kind of thought and they have that. And then start to talk in a group, like what kind of approach would you take? How many EV charging spots you would like to put there? Where would you put it? All of that, whatever your case there is, whatever is applicable to that, and then think about which stakeholders do you have to work with to make this happen, and how do you highlight the value of EV charging at this property. So those are instructions. I can probably put them in a chat after we start the breakout room, so you can go to chat to look at the instructions at that point. But from my part, Kevin, you could start the breakout rooms and people could join the breakout rooms and start talking about this.
Sounds good. A few people are signing off, so we have about 10 people. So
oh, people heard about this breakout room and they're like, I'm not taking part of that. You're losing me right there.
Running for the hills. Yeah. So we might have 2 rooms.
That's gonna happen.
So,
all right,
yeah.
Make 2 rooms then.
Okay.
That's really fine.
Here we go.
All right. And Kevin, I wasn't thinking that I would be participating either of these. So,
You did not? Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I'll just put it not now here. We'll see if the people are from well, the rooms don't look that good.
Yeah, maybe I'll move a couple people. It doesn't look like.
Yeah, just throw one room together. Whoever is there, just throw Drew in one room, and then we have at least one group there.
Yep.
That's a good idea to do. All right.
Okay, I might join room 1 too. That's cool.
Yep.
Okay.
Please do that.
Hey, Jukka, we're back. It was Drew, Jeremy, Amanda, and I in the other room.
All right, good. Well, did you have any insights into this? Did you think about some project or anything like that?
Yeah, Jeremy, do you want to speak to your project?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Jukka. I'm the housing director at the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing, and I was talking about some of the new builds that we're doing, either directly with our First Homes partner or other developers. And we have not put charging into any of our new builds yet, and we've been talking about that. Cost is always an issue. But Drew mentioned that the cost of that kind of option one that you showed with it, which is really just putting the conduit in, prepping it, is very, very, very minimal, especially compared to what the cost would be afterward. And so I think might try to move forward with that option if we're not able to put the actual chargers in, at least prep the wall space for that.
Yeah. I mean, the most affordable way, of course, is not even run the conduit, but just make sure that you have the openings in the wall and you have the space for the panel capacity, even if you don't have the panels in place yet. I mean, all of that, so that you're kind of like future-proofing it and then putting at least some of the stuff there, but making it ready so that you can do it for everyone at some point.
Right. Okay.
Good. All right. Any other thoughts you had there as a group, or if anyone has any further questions here?
I think we're pretty good. I mean, the folks that are here are sustainability professionals or folks that are kind of drinking the green Kool-Aid, if you will, Jukka. So
Yep. That's very good.
Definitely have some inherent interest in some work that's moving in this direction, but probably have more to update soon as some of that work starts, I think.
Excellent. Well, that's good. Then thank you from my part then for having me here to talk with you about the topic, and hope you got some insights into some of this and at least few perspectives that will help you in your work.
Oh, most definitely. It was really helpful for me personally. So I really appreciate you being here, and thanks for your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jukka.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Jukka.